Bob contacted me while walking in the mall one day. I wasn't walking, he was. He said, "Why don't you come and join us and make a presentation?" And I thought, okay. So I came over here and I was thanking God that I didn't have to do a presentation that particular next Tuesday of next month. And I've enjoyed this time. I told them earlier that I don't often speak to a room this size with this many people in it. Most of the churches I preach in have 17, 20, 25, 30 at the most. But they've got great big facilities. The albatross that hangs around them is this huge facility they have to feed all the time. I am so glad today. I did a lot of computer coding over the years, and I am so glad that I didn't write the code for the Iowa Democratic Party. That person is in a whole lot of trouble right now. Sunday may have been a great Super Bowl Sunday, but it was another day. What was the other day that Sunday was? Groundhog Day. Wonderful. My first sermon was on Groundhog Day. You say, how could you preach on that? Well, it wasn't difficult because it was about transformation. And if you remember the movie, Bill Murray went to Punxsutawney. Being a Pennsylvanian, that should sort of roll off my tongue, but it doesn't quite. And he had come from Pittsburgh, where he was a newscaster, and he was going to be there whenever they took the groundhog out of the groundhog out of the ground. He predicted whether it was going to be 6 more weeks of winter or spring was going to be coming soon. And if you remember that movie, he went back to his motel or hotel, I guess it was a bed and breakfast, and said, get up the next day, go back to Pittsburgh, and whatever. Well, he woke up the next morning, and it was still Groundhog Day. What is a groundhog? What? Right, very good. We see these advertisements on the television right now, and they're talking about woodchucks. And I went on my phone and I said, what is a woodchuck? And they said, a groundhog. The only thing I thought groundhogs were good for was laying alongside the road and sort of representing animals that just can't make it. But I've never seen woodchucks or groundhogs throw anything into the water. So, transformation. We don't often think about transformation in our lives, but we're going through it continually. I've taught both New and Old Testament, and surprisingly, the Old Testament is a reflection. They talk about what happened in the past. What was the greatest day for a Jew or Hebrew was coming out of slavery in Egypt. And they often go back to that. Even the later prophets do that. You go to the New Testament, it's always looking to the future. The coming of Christ again. Isaiah talked about the coming of Christ the first time. But in terms of all the other prophets, they pretty much focused on the past. And as I thought about talking about transformation, I said, I really have to talk about my past. The path I took to get to where I am today. And it seems like whenever I had to make a difficult decision, whenever I tried to do it on my own, I sort of fell flat on my face. But whenever I released my decision-making over to the Lord, things changed. They may not have been immediately, but it changed in ways that I had not foreseen. Product of Pennsylvania. Product of a family that's Christian to begin with. But I was one of the frozen chosen Presbyterians. Some of you don't know that title, but We use that down here too. You claim to be Christian, but you don't talk about it. One of the things my father said to me was, two things you don't talk about: religion and politics. Well, I'm standing up here today sort of not following the counsel of my father. My father was an aircraft mechanic. He worked for the Air Force in Middletown, Pennsylvania, Olmsted Air Force Base, which McNamara closed down back whenever I was about ready to graduate from high school. He worked there for 30 years. Had years in the Air Force, the Army Air Force. And that job killed him. Nobody went out and took a knife and stuck it in his ribs, but he cleaned out brake drums on aircraft. What were brake shoes made of? Asbestos. And so when he was 75, he started getting weak, started having problems. And by the end of 75, he died of mesothelioma. And he didn't go out and collect a whole lot of money. He wasn't there then. And my mother didn't follow up on that. But he died happy. He died giving thanks for the life he'd had. I hope I can say the same thing whenever I reach that time period. My mother, who was supposed to die early because all of the people in her family, she's 96 now, still calls and said, "What are you eating? What are you working on?" She has a fit whenever I tell her I'm doing things like this, because she said, don't tax yourself. And I don't. That's why I'm 475 miles away. I can do things without having somebody looking over my shoulder all the time. But she's getting to that point where she needs additional help, and I'm sorry for my brothers who have to do that. I went to college in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania to begin with. I did graduate from Dickinson, but I went to Harrisburg Area Community College. The Pennsylvania legislature made the decision, we're going to have a community college system. It started just when I needed it. I'd say that God's hands were in that. Knowing the Pennsylvania legislature, things don't move too quickly. It took them 2 or 3 years to pass a budget one year. And they're still fighting over that one, and that was 2015, I think. The initials for that college were HACC, hack. So I was a hacker long before that was a popular term in this day and age. I went to Dickinson. How many of you have heard Dickinson? Yay, there's some of you around. It was founded in 1773. It was a field hospital for Confederate troops during the Civil War. The Confederate troops got no further up the line until, let's see, they got to Camp Hill, which is just up the road from where I lived. I think it was right before the Battle of Gettysburg. But we don't talk about that down here. I don't bring that up very often. What else is Dickinson known for? It's a great liberal arts school. For many years, it was summer training camp of the Washington Redskins. So I got to see all these great players there whenever I was working there, and also whenever I was a student. Again, being there on that campus gave me an opportunity to see life from another point. Community college was with students who either couldn't afford or couldn't get into a four-year college. For me, it was a matter of not being able to afford Dickinson. Dickinson now is $52,000 a year in tuition fees. That doesn't include room and board. And we have a lot of colleges like that today. But I was blessed. Dickinson was 12, 15 miles up the road one way, and Hack was 15 miles the other way. So I've been blessed by the Lord intervening. I graduated in '69. Bad time to graduate from college. I think I see some heads nodding. Vietnam War was going strong at that point in time. Called my draft board and I said, how much time have I got before I get my draft notice? 2 months. I said, uh-oh. I was doing some manual labor at that point in time, so I went down to the Air Force recruiter and I said, I really would like to sign up here. And so they said, yeah, good. Those sergeants really are interested in getting a head count. And I passed all the officer training school or officer candidate school tests, went and took my physical, and I flunked it. There were people that were there who wanted to flunk the physical. But no, the person who had signed up for something, they got a pass. So now I had a problem. I expected my next 2 years to be taken care of, or next 4 years to be taken care of. I didn't have a job. So fortunately, there was a new dean of the college at Dickinson coming in who had an international reputation. And he called, or his office called and said, would you like to interview for a job as assistant to the dean for institutional research? I said, sure, I don't know what institutional research is, but really he didn't either. But it was a good time to go into that field. And we sat and talked for a while. He says, well, yeah, you can come work with me. His name was Gerald Stanley Hawkins. How many of you know that name? No? Do? He was the astronomer who decoded Stonehenge. He was the one who found out that there was an astronomical observatory and they did movies on him. He lasted 2 years. He was not a dean. He was a better astronomer than he was a dean. I lasted a month longer than he did. Went off to graduate school. Again, there was a program there that was fully paid for by the Public Health Service. There was a program there that really interested me because I was interested in demography, and graduated there with a degree in biostatistics. Well, I won't bore you with all of that, but I went to work for the Center for Disease Control. Now, the center is getting a lot of airtime right now because of the virus in China. A lot of work there, about 3 floors above my office were all of the most deadly viruses in the world. They were kept in locked cages, really. But I was in family planning. You say, that's not a disease, is it? And it really is not. But I did abortion research. Oh, and it was before 1973. Before 72, I guess, the year. And that's when things changed because there was a court decision that abortions were legal in this country. But you know that before that, there were about 250,000 abortions done every year in this country. Repealing the court's action right now doesn't mean you're stopping abortion. It's still going to go on, illegally or legally in some way. What I also worked on was underage sterilizations. Do you know how many women and men were sterilized in this country? This state had a high number of them. They were underage. They were primarily African American. They started getting reported on the databases that I worked with. And somebody said, wait a minute, what's going on? Because they were paid for by federal money. And I started working on a survey that we were going to do with doctors, finding out how many more of them there were than what was reported on the database. And I called, I think it was Caspar Weinberger's office one day, and he was secretary of HEW. And I said, I have a question. We're working on this survey to go out to doctors about the sterilization. And they said, you're doing what? And I told them again. And they said, what? Stop your work right now. Tell your boss to call me. And so he called. They stopped that whole project cold. They didn't want to know how many more were being sterilized. We had a record of a good many, but they didn't want to know how many more. I met my wife there. She said she was in smallpox eradication program. That was the year that they said that smallpox is totally eradicated from the world. Well, I got news for them. They didn't get it all. But she was clerical, and we met in the computing center. Somebody there thought we'd make a good match, and so we ended up dating. And after the second date, I knew this is the woman that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. And so 47 years later, I'm still spending my life with her. She has been a blessing, but she has been the one who has changed the direction of my life more than anyone else. She was totally just targeted toward the Lord's work. Day one that I met her. We went to church on Sundays. I hadn't been going to church while I was in graduate school. And when I first went to Atlanta, and we prayed together. We'd go to her home, and we'd sing hymns on the way. People must have thought we were crazy. We were just singing as loud as we could. And we enjoyed that. We enjoyed just being together. And, but she hated the abortion work. Not so much the sterilization, but she hated that part of my life at that point in time. She said, somehow you got to get out of doing that. Well, you know, my job depended on me doing this research. And we prayed about it. And a couple of weeks later, I got a call from Chapel Hill, my graduate program, said, there's somebody in UNCW that was looking for a person to be their director of institutional research. They said, we remember your past. That short time at Dickinson was recorded, and somebody remembered that I had done that. Well, they said, would you like to interview? I said, sure. And I called UNCW. Whenever you're in Chapel Hill, and you're an out-of-stater, and you're working and up there to get through your program, I didn't even know where Wilmington was. I didn't even know there was a Wilmington. And, you know, when you're in Chapel Hill, the Triangle area, it's all about the Triangle area. I know you all know that. But if you come from North Carolina, you know where the rest of the state is. Me, I didn't know. Come down Interstate 85 into Chapel Hill, and I'd go to my dorm, and that was it. So here I was, and I got a job offer. And so I took the job. And at that point, Mary and I weren't married yet. We weren't living together. My mother says, why don't you live together? I said, wait a minute, Mother. This doesn't fit the image I have of my mother. But God opened a door and said, you know, I'm giving you an opportunity to move away from the abortion research and to go into a field that you already know something about. Well, whenever I interviewed for that job here, Bill Wagner and Jim Price and a number of other people sat in that interview. They didn't know what institutional research was either. And so I sort of made myself feel good because I said, I'm sort of ahead of the game here. Whenever we came to Wilmington, we got married in my wife's home church in Hope Mills. So for her, this was a trip home. She didn't have to go far to go home because her parents were still alive. And so we immediately, coming to Wilmington, we immediately started going to church. You know, things just keep falling into place. Looking back on my history, you deviate a little bit from that, but whenever you sort of surrender yourself to God, you end up coming back along the path that God wants you to take. First church we went to was Winter Park Presbyterian. Church, we went there in January and joined the church in February. We didn't even consider any of the other churches in town. My wife wasn't baptized until we were in Atlanta, in Decatur, And we went to the church associated with the Columbia Drive Theological Seminary, Columbia Theological Seminary, and went to the Presbyterian church there. And I said, how about you get baptized? She said, okay. So one Sunday she went up front and was baptized. Then in the next week's bulletin it says, we want to welcome our newest Presbyterian. She says, I joined the Presbyterian church too? Not only got baptized, I joined the Presbyterian church. I said, yeah. Some days she regrets that, but most cases she is committed to what we do in the Presbyterian church. Whenever I came to UNCW, it had 650 acres of ground, and some of it was not buildable. We had 2,542 students. Today we have 17,000 students. Some of those are online students. And I had never predicted the university growing faster than any higher than about 10,000 students. So whenever I left, we actually had 11,000. But we ended up growing faster and academically stronger over those years. And I'm proud to say I had something to do with that. I was involved in research on student performance. I was involved in alumni analysis. I was involved in faculty analysis. Some of them didn't like that, but we did a lot of stuff that, and I saw a lot of data that most people just said, oh, that's not important. I got news for you. In today's economy, in today's legislative actions, the data is extremely important. I found that out whenever I went to Chapel Hill and worked up there. I stayed working for Bill Wagner until Jim Lucy showed up. Jim was a different beast. He was a different person. We went out he says, come on, go with me, we're going up to Chapel Hill. And I said, okay, no notice. I don't often wear a tie whenever I go to work. I feel uncomfortable wearing one now. But, so on the way back, he started talking. Tell me about so-and-so. Tell me what you think about that person. And I'm saying, okay. I said, now, this is all off the record. He says, yeah, kind of. And turns out that he was collecting information from a lot of people at the university. And he wanted to know how good individuals were. I felt very uncomfortable in that situation. Bill Wagner never asked me anything like that. Charlie Cahill, who was the provost, he didn't ask me anything like that. I worked mostly with Charlie Cahill. And I did so much. He said, I want to expand your responsibilities. Let's go into university planning. Because we didn't really have a university planning model. And this was 1973. And SACS, the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools, required one. And so he said, Bob, I want you to do that for me. I said, okay. Well, he moved me into his complex of offices in Alderman Hall. And he'd come in the morning and sit down and said, you know, I had an idea in the shower this morning. And I'd go, oh, God, no, please. That was a sign that we were going to have problems. And we did quite well. Some of his ideas were good, but he consulted with me, consulted with a number of people on campus, wanted to know what we thought about his ideas. Whenever he went to the planning committee and said, I have this idea, and I think we should try it. These were all the senior officers from the university. Nobody said, no, Jim, I don't think that's a good idea. You just don't do that to the senior officer of an organization. Some organizations you can, but Jim had great ideas. And there's a lot of programs at the university that are there now because of his great ideas. But it was a different day and age for me. I got to work on facilities. I got to work on, again, enrollment projections. I got to work on maintaining and understanding the planning process and the planning documents that went out of the university. And all of that was because of what doors the Lord had opened for me over time. I had learned about institutional research. I'd learned about, at Dickinson, I had learned about how colleges work and don't work. I'd understood about higher level communications that sometimes weren't what we thought they were. I had the joy of doing that. While I was working for Jim, I started developing a cardiac problem. And he says, "You're blaming that on me, aren't you?" I said, No. I enjoyed working 60 hours a week. I enjoyed being in the office on Saturday. I enjoyed sitting in the office on Friday evening, and he'd walk by and throw a pine cone after basketball games, throw a pine cone at my window, and he says, "Come on, Bob." Well, it was not quite easy enough just to pick up and leave. But I don't blame my heart problems on him. I blame them on me because I was not one who was prepared to do all these things physically, mentally. I suffer from anxiety. I get up here. Do I look anxious to you? No, this just comes from all the things. Bob knows that sometimes in Board of Trustees meetings, he'd say, "Bob, come on up here. I want you to tell them about such and such." No prep, no time to think about it, no time to prepare anything. And so I can stand up, do that now. I did it for the president of the university system. I did it for Jim. I've done it in many situations. I'll tell you a secret. I've told this before. One Monday, I got a call from a church saying, "We need somebody to preach on Sunday. The minister who was supposed to be there is not able to make it." I said, "Okay." So I sat down, wrote a sermon that afternoon. 20 minutes is not long. It's about 6-7 pages of notes. I don't write them out. I use notes. And Friday, I got up and I said, this isn't the message I want to deliver. This is not what I want to say. Sunday morning, standing in the shower, I still didn't have a message that I wanted to say. And I said, "Lord, I really want to do this well." I said, this church needs to hear a message, and I can't come up with a topic. And I said, "Help me out." He says, "It's not about you, it's about me." And I thought, that's right. That's why we go to the pulpit. It's not about us. It's not about how good we feel, how good we prepare, how well we prepare ahead of time. It's about preaching about Jesus Christ and preaching the Word. We are sometimes carried away by looking for ways that we look good. Pastors, people, we're not called to look good. We are called to take the word of Jesus Christ out into the world. I worked at Chapel Hill. Then I came back and I worked at Presbyterian Coastal Carolina, built a database for them. They didn't have one, and everything was done on paper. So whenever the directory changed, you had a new minister coming in, everything was retyped. And I said, this is not good. So I built a database for them, an access database, and then they do everything from that. Now, it's still there, but it's done online. So all the churches can see all the information. As I was leaving that job, I got a call from ECU, from the provost, saying they needed help from someone who was knowledgeable about enrollment projections, the financial repercussions of that. Marilyn Shearer was the provost. Marilyn is now the provost at UNCW. We go out and have lunch once in a while or have supper together. I enjoy her. She's a wonderful person to work with. She's from not far from my hometown grew up not far from my hometown in Pennsylvania. The Lord brings us into contact with people who We know, we can understand. Marilyn's not a Presbyterian. She grew up Presbyterian. She's questioning her Christian faith. I had the opportunity to talk to her, to work with her. There's a joy in that. I'm sort of getting to the end of, didn't realize it was that long. I want to sort of finish up maybe by reading some of this. One of the most difficult things that Mary and I have ever gone through happened in 2018. Our son had been sick for a year with kidney and liver failure. He was getting better, and then we got a call. I actually got a text message from him saying, I'm bleeding. They're going to take me to the hospital. They took him to Cary Hospital, and then they moved him over to UNC Chapel Hill hospitals. That was on a Monday morning. Wednesday morning at about 5 minutes of 9, we told the doctors to turn off all the support. If you haven't done that with a parent or a child, that's probably one of those difficult things to do. Stephen, his EEG showed that he had been deprived of oxygen to his brain, and the frontal portion of his brain was not doing well. They said, we can help him recover from that, but he won't be the same child that you knew and loved. His wife was there, so they turned to me and to her, and they said, what do you want to do? He said, we might as well go ahead and turn it all off. And so I was there when he was born, and then I was there when his heart beat its last. I hope you don't have to go through that. I'm preaching at Bethany Presbyterian Church in Wrightsboro this coming Sunday. Still haven't written a sermon. Of the four passages I've chosen, the four passages are presented in the lectionary, I've chosen the gospel passage from Matthew, the 5th chapter, the 13th through the 20th verses. Many of you know this passage. We see in it the idea of being the salt of the earth, the light of the world. Doesn't mean that he was asking his disciples to carry around a bag of salt or to carry a candle. He was saying, take my message to these people, provide some hope for them, provide some life for them, give them light where there is darkness, not only around them, but within them. Christ is calling us, not just in terms of what we are to do in the world with the Great Commission, but he's saying, here's how you do it. You provide hope, you provide light, and that's what we're called to do. We need to carry the message to the world when we leave this place on Tuesdays. We don't want to just eat, listen, and leave. We are called to do so much more for our Lord. We are called to take the message, the hope, the love of our Lord to this tiny piece of his world. Go now and fulfill the Great Commission.